This video is for educational and infotainment purposes only. It is not intended to encourage or glorify the use of violence or criminal activity in any way. And remember, all suspects are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. So now we have the probable cause affidavit, which outlines the investigation into exactly what happened the night that 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death in their home in Moscow, Idaho. And it is chilling. And while the victims' families were complaining about a lack of progress with law enforcement, it has now become clear that they were making excellent progress. They just weren't sharing it with everybody. But now we have a very detailed explanation of what happened that night and information about the man charged with 4 counts of murder. So what happened and how did the police crack the case? Well, you're about to find out. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you are watching Lawyer Up. In today's episode, we are going to look at just what happened on the night in question. We will go through the timeline of events. Then we will walk through the house, just as Corporal Payne, who is the one who prepared the probable cause affidavit supporting the indictment, did. I'll share with you his exact path and what he saw that day. We will look at the police work and what they did step by step to put together what appears to be a very good case against Bryan Kohberger, all in today's episode. If you enjoy the episode, if you learned something, hit that like button. If you got a comment, you have a question about the case, put it in the comment section below, and remember to subscribe to the channel so you can get all the updates about this case as it moves forward. So let's start from the beginning, the relevant towns. Now, Moscow is a city in northern Idaho along the state's border with Washington. With a population of over 25,000, Moscow is the home of the University of Idaho, which has an average student population of around 11,000 students. So it is a small college town. 8 miles to the west is Pullman, a city in eastern Washington along the state's border with Idaho. It has a population of around 35,000 and is the home of Washington State University, which has an average student population of around 28,000 students. So it has a much larger student body than the U of I. So who was involved? 6 people were in a home in Moscow, Idaho at the time of the murders. 5 females and 1 male. The 5 women lived there and the man was a guest that evening. 4 would be murdered with the other 2 surviving. The suspect arrested in connection with these murders was an adult male who lived 8 miles to the west in Pullman, Washington. Now specifically, who were these people? The 4 victims. Madison Mogan, Maddie, aged 21 of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, was a senior at the university, majoring in marketing and a member of the Pi Beta Phi sorority. Kaylee Gonsalves, aged 21 of Rathdrum, Idaho, was a senior with a major in general studies. Maddie and Kaylee met as 6th graders, were best friends, and basically inseparable. Xana Kernodle, 20 of Post Falls, Idaho, was a marketing major and also a member of the Pi Beta Phi sorority. And her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, who was a 20-year-old freshman from Mount Vernon, Washington. He was a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity. So who else was in the home at the time of the murders? The other 2 roommates, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk. They survived the attack. Bethany would describe Maddie as her big in the sorority, and Dylan, well, Dylan stood face to face with the killer on the night in question. It's a small miracle that she escaped with her life. The suspect, Bryan Christopher Kohberger, age 28, originally from the state of Pennsylvania, but he had moved to Washington and was pursuing a PhD in criminal justice at Washington State University at the time of the alleged murders. So now let's talk about this 3-story house at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, because it's important to understand the layout before we walk through it as Corporal Payne did. So it's 3 stories. The first and second stories part of the original construction, with an addition that expanded the second level and then added a third level to the home. The various levels actually become clearer when viewed from the side of the house. So what you have is the first floor or bottom floor that is technically the front of the house. That floor has 2 bedrooms and a staircase. When facing the front door, the bedroom to the left was occupied by Bethany, who survived. The bedroom to the right was vacant, with its former occupant having moved out of the home a few months prior. From there, a drone shot from the rear actually gives you a better feel for the layout of the second and third levels. If you start with the second floor, that is the main area of the home with the living room and kitchen. It also has a patio area and a back entrance. The second floor has 2 bedrooms. The one nearest the patio door was Xana's bedroom, which was also occupied by Ethan, her boyfriend, on the night in question. The other bedroom on the east side of the second floor was occupied by Dylan Mortensen, who survived. The second floor also contains a staircase to the third floor, which again contains 2 more bedrooms and a shared bathroom. In looking at the drone shot, to the left is Kaylee's room and to the right is Maddie's room. So that's the layout of the house. Now let's talk about the timeline of events. And this includes all of the information from the PC statement, the probable cause statement, that was gathered by numerous surveillance videos, phone records, including the GPS locations, witness interviews, and DNA evidence. Later on, I'll explain how law enforcement acquired all this evidence, but for now, let's just walk through it. We will start on Saturday night. So police have said that Ethan and Xana were at a party at the Sigma Chi fraternity house on the University of Idaho campus. This was within walking distance of the home at 1122 King Road, and witnesses have them returning home at around 1:45 a.m. on Sunday, November 13th. At that time, Dylan and Bethany, the 2 who survived, were already there, having returned home around 1 a.m. after being out separately in Moscow that evening. Kaylee and Maddie had yet to make it home. Those 2 had been at the Corner Club Bar downtown at 202 Main Street that evening. They stayed there until just before the bar closed at 1:30 a.m. and then exited onto Main Street. Video shows the girls walking from the Corner Club down Main Street. At 1:40 a.m., the girls stop along with several other people at Grub Truckers, a food truck located at 318 South Main. It was here that most of the footage of the girls that evening was captured by the truck's live feed security camera. And it was this footage that gave law enforcement their first person of interest. But we now know that hoodie guy was not involved in the murders. At 1:53 a.m., phone records indicate that Maddie and Kaylee got a ride home. It was a 1.2-mile trip, and they arrived at King Road just before 2 a.m. The cabbie who drove the girls would say they were in good spirits, laughing and saying they couldn't wait to get home and eat their pasta. So by 2 a.m., all 6 of them are back home at 1122 King Road. At that exact moment, Brian Koberger, the 28-year-old graduate student who was arrested for these murders, is sitting in his apartment in Pullman, Washington, a town only 8 short miles west of Moscow. We now know that Koberger was pursuing a PhD in criminal justice at Washington State University and was somewhat obsessed with Dennis Rader, an American serial killer known as the BTK, Bind, Torture, Kill, Strangler, who between 1974 and 1991 killed 10 people in Kansas and then sent taunting letters to the police and media outlets describing the details of these crimes. And he got away with it for well over a decade before finally getting caught in 2005. At 2:45 a.m., phone records and campus video surveillance would reveal that Brian Kohberger went on the move in his little white Hyundai Elantra. At 2:47 a.m., his phone would be shut off and go dark for several hours. So from there, investigators would be forced to rely on video surveillance cameras from numerous sources to map the travel of his white Elantra, which we now know was headed to 1122 King Road in Moscow. Back in Moscow, it's now around 3 a.m. Cell phone data, including the timing of multiple calls to Kaylee's ex-boyfriend Jack, evidence that she and Maddie were still awake at 3 a.m. This was also confirmed by roommate Dylan in an interview. Security video would reveal that Kohberger's white Elantra first appeared in the King Road neighborhood at 3:29 a.m. and would make a total of 4 passes by the residents over the next 30 minutes before parking. And this wasn't his first rodeo. Phone records gathered by law enforcement would reveal that Kohberger's cell phone had been at this location on at least 12 different times in the previous 6 months. So he had obviously been planning something here for a long, long time. Inside, Xana, still awake and scrolling through TikTok, would order some food to be delivered by DoorDash. The order is delivered at around 4 a.m., and from here, things get murky. Dylan would confirm that she was asleep in her bedroom on the 2nd floor when she was awoken by a sound at around 4 a.m. So what was that sound? Was it Xana collecting her DoorDash order and returning to her room to resume looking at TikToks? Possibly. Or was it something much more sinister? Laying awake, Dylan hears what she believes is Kaylee playing with her dog upstairs. But now many believe tragically that she may have been listening to her friends being murdered. A few moments later, Dylan hears someone who she believes is Xana say, "There's someone in here." So Dylan gets up, opens her bedroom door, and peers into the dark 2nd floor living area. Seeing nothing, she shuts it, but she would immediately reopen it when she heard what she thought was crying coming from Xana's bedroom. She then hears a man's voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." And assuming it was Ethan, she shuts her bedroom door again. But as the crying continues, she opens her door and walks out into the 2nd floor living area. It's at this point when a man, described as about 6 feet tall with a slender build and bushy eyebrows, clad in black clothing with a mask that covered his mouth and nose, walks right past her and out the patio door on the 2nd floor. In shock, her words, Dylan would say that she returned to her bedroom and locked the door. Interestingly, a security camera from next door, less than 50 feet from Xana's bedroom, that also contained audio, would record whimpering and a loud thud at exactly 4:17 a.m. That is believed to have been Xana's body hitting the floor, with Ethan having been already murdered in the bed. The white Elantra is then seen in security video leaving the neighborhood at a high rate of speed at 4:20 a.m. So based upon video of the vehicle, we now know that this entire quadruple homicide took place between 4:04 a.m. and 4:20 a.m. So it took roughly 15 minutes to change thousands of lives forever. Now, why Dylan didn't call 911 when she saw an intruder dressed in all black walking through her house at 4 a.m., or why she didn't at least check on her roommate who was crying, but instead just went back to bed, all remains a huge mystery. But back in the Elantra, Kohberger's trip home should have taken about 10 minutes, but instead his vehicle doesn't show up on WSU campus security footage for over an hour. He did kick his phone back on at 4:48 a.m., about 30 minutes into his return trip, and it pings way away from Kohberger's apartment and the crime scene, which actually helped investigators because they then knew additional areas that they could pull security video from, mapping Kohberger's probable trip home from the crime scene. And in the PC statement, it is outlined that instead of driving the straight line back home, he does a great big loop down and around that takes roughly an hour. Why does he do this? Probably to conceal his whereabouts, but also he would cross 6 different rivers via that route home. And in my opinion, he probably ditched the murder weapon in one of them. So by 5:30 a.m., Kohberger is back home in Pullman. 4 people are dead and 2 roommates are still sleeping. Dylan is on the 2nd floor, locked in her bedroom, and Bethany is asleep on the bottom floor. And then, for whatever reason, Kohberger leaves his apartment at 9 a.m. the next morning and drives back to the scene of the crime. This time he drives straight across, arriving at 9:32 a.m. to a quiet scene. The murder still undiscovered, but that was coming. Dylan and Bethany eventually get up to an eerily quiet house, and after a while, what they discover will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Police then respond to a hysterical 911 call, and upon arrival at 112 King, they discover what they have described as the most gruesome and harrowing crime scene they have ever witnessed. By 4 p.m. on November 13th of 2022, Corporal Brett Payne, who wrote the PC statement that supports the 4-count murder indictment, arrives on the scene. And I'm going to read to you what, in his own words, he saw as he walked through the house that day. On November 13th, 2022, at approximately 4 p.m., Moscow Police Department Sergeant Blaker and I, Brett Payne, Corporal, responded to 1122 King Road, Moscow, Idaho. I entered the King Road residence through the bottom floor on the north side of the building. I walked upstairs to the 2nd floor. As I approached the room, I could see a body, later identified as Xana Kernodle, lying on the floor. Xana was deceased with wounds which appeared to have been caused by an edged weapon. Also in the room was a male, later identified as Ethan Chapin, who was also deceased. I then went upstairs to the 3rd floor of the residence. The bedroom on the west side of the floor was later determined to be Kaylee's room. There was a dog in the room. The dog belonged to Kaylee and her ex-boyfriend Jack. There was a small bathroom on the east side of the 3rd floor. This bathroom shared a wall with Madison's bedroom, which was situated on the southeast corner of the 3rd floor. As I entered this bedroom, I could see 2 females in a single bed in the room. Both Kaylee and Madison were deceased with visible stab wounds. I later noticed what appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Madison's body. And with that, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, were pronounced dead, with the coroner ultimately determining that the 4 had bled to death between 4 and 4:20 a.m. the night before. And we know that the scene must have been gruesome due to the massive blood loss in Xana's room that actually oozed from inside her bedroom through the wall and the floor and dripped down the outside of the concrete foundation of the home. You can see it in the photos. It's absolutely horrific. It took 6 weeks to make an arrest, but as everybody now knows, law enforcement finally arrested Brian Kohberger for these murders. And the question is, how in the hell did the police crack this case? Well, the PC affidavit laid out exactly what the police did to solve this crime, and it was very good police work. So obviously, the first thing that law enforcement did following the discovery of the murders was to investigate the crime scene, where they discovered of relevance a bloody shoe print as well as the knife sheath. Now, they didn't get the knife itself, only the sheath. It was clear that all 4 were murdered by a very sharp cutting instrument. So this tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to the girls was obviously supremely relevant. It had a KA-BAR, USMC, and the U.S. Marine Corps globe and anchor insignia stamped on it. And on the button snap to the sheath, a single source of male DNA would be discovered. Now, the actual knife hasn't been discovered, and so we don't know for sure what the exact murder weapon looks like. But here is what the knife that is standard issue with that sheath looks like, and it is quite menacing. From there, law enforcement did a video canvass, collecting the footage from all of the security cameras in the area at the time of the murder. What they discovered was that there were very few cars in that area in the early morning hours. But what they did see was a white Elantra that drove past the house on 4 different occasions, very near the suspected time of the murders. So obviously they wanted to speak to the driver to see if he or she had any information. So law enforcement put out a public request for any information about a 2011 to 2016 white Elantra from in and around Moscow. I'm sure you probably saw it on the news. In response to that request, 8 miles to the west, a Washington State University security guard runs a search of its database regarding Elantras who have parking tags registered with the university. And there were a handful of them. One of them, a 2015 Elantra with Pennsylvania plates, was registered to a student named Brian Koberger. So the security officer forwards the information and the home addresses of all the Elantra owners to the cops in Moscow. So law enforcement in Moscow then pulls the driver's license records of these individuals. This gives them a home address, height, weight, and a picture of each person's face. Interestingly, Koberger's slender build, height, and bushy eyebrows generally matched Dylan's description of the intruder in her home that morning. So then they do a canvas search of video cameras in the area of Koberger's apartment to see if the Elantra happened to be out and about in the early morning hours of the 13th. And it was. They also ran a criminal background check on Koberger and found a single traffic stop from earlier in the summer. And on that ticket was his cell phone number. So then they quite easily figured out which cellular company provided service for that number. It was AT&T. And then after obtaining a subpoena, they got GPS coordinate records from AT&T for Koberger's cell phone. AT&T also confirmed the billing address for his phone in Albertsville, Pennsylvania, his parents' address, which becomes relevant here in just a moment. Then the FBI's CAST, C-A-S-T, or their Cellular Analysis Survey team, gets involved and uses their expertise to map just where that phone had been, going all the way back to June of 2022. And what they discovered was that during that time period, Koberger's phone went by the murder site on at least 12 different occasions. And they were also able to get detailed information about his travels between his apartment and the crime scene on the night in question, and then again the next morning. So at this point, they are pretty sure they have their guy. But the icing on the cake was the DNA that was left on the knife sheath that he accidentally left behind in Madison's room. Now, the DNA they extracted didn't match anything in the law enforcement databases. So they needed some of Koberger's DNA to compare it to. But how do you get it from him without tipping him off? Because if they tipped him off that they were onto him, he could flee and potentially never be found. So what they did, and I've seen this done a couple of times in the past, was that the cops stole trash. And not his trash, his parents' trash back in Pennsylvania. Because a parent's DNA profile is close enough. And so they compared his dad's DNA profile from his garbage to the DNA on the knife sheath that was found at the scene, and they were able to rule out 99.9998% of the population. That's a very, very high level of certainty that it was Koberger. Checkmate. So that's how they did it. Video canvassing, cell phone mapping, roommate testimony, simple public record inquiries, DNA evidence, and good old-fashioned police work. So what was his motive? Well, we don't know. But if it was to follow in the footsteps of the BTK killer, to murder and then toy with the police, it turns out he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. So that is the episode. That's the update. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button for me and make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep up to date on this court case as it moves forward. That's all for today. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you've been watching Lawyer Up.